But this, I just want to do a little background of this series. So, and some of you already know this story, but on adult education, adult spiritual formation, we chose this series mainly because of the title of it. And it was, and the title is Wholeness, but within the brief description, there was another description about polarization, and focusing on polarization being the reason why we don't have wholeness in our society now. And polarization struck us as something that we should probably talk about, given the context of our country and also otherwise. So that's why we picked this. The person who's talking in this video is someone named Suzanne Stabile. And so I had to look up who she was. And turns out she's been referred to as the godmother of the Enneagram, which I thought was unfair since we've got our own godmother of the Enneagram. But anyway, that's what she's referred to. She talks about it all over. But that's not really the focus of this. You can see where, if you're familiar with Enneagram, where her thinking reflects her knowledge about the Enneagram. But she doesn't mention it at all practically in here. This is something else about polarization, about relationships. She's concerned about the relationships, both our personal relationships and broader relationships are really in a crisis in this country now. And so that's what she's going to talk about. This is a 13-minute video. Oh, I should mention also that Susan Stabile was, she grew up Catholic. She ended up leaving the Catholic Church when she married a Catholic priest who was excommunicated.
That kind of does it.
And then she was welcomed, her husband was welcomed into a Methodist church and was a pastor there for 26 years. And so and you can see where that cultural context, that switch, you can see it in what she talks about and how she talks about things. I thought there's a little bit of history that might be interesting to you. So I'm going to have Chris put this video on now. And there is a little intro statement at the beginning of this video. And if you scroll just a little bit, Chris, I'm just gonna scroll down. I mean, yeah. And so this is how this series, which we're going to have over the next 3 weeks, is described. I'll read it and forgive my reading, but I'm going to do that. That this 3-session film series with Suzanne Stabile invites participants to explore the challenges of division, fear, and polarization in our relationships and communities. And that's what grabbed us and why we wanted to show this. So now Chris is going to scroll down to the first episode, which she entitles Crisis and Connection. So go ahead, Chris.
I open at least half of my teaching gigs right now by saying I think we are culturally and globally in relationship crisis. And I think it's because we're busy, too busy, and we think we can have more than is realistic of everything. More money, more friends, more food, more trinkets, more of everything. And I think we're in a relationship crisis because we're more polarized than we've ever been. And I think we're more polarized than we've ever been because there is no third way, as Richard Rohr would say. In fact, we're stuck between it's either my way or your way. There isn't our way anymore. And so churches are dividing and communities are dividing and families are dividing, because we're not generous enough with one another to sit and listen and make space for difference until we discover a part of the path where we can walk together. And I am grateful that I have the wisdom and the opportunity to teach the Enneagram, because understanding that people don't see what you see and they don't process the same way you do ultimately means that if you can understand how other people take in information, you can understand why they don't think what you think. And then you have a conversation instead of a disconnection. And it requires time and patience, and there doesn't seem to be much security for folks in we are. It seems that for some reason that I don't understand, people feel more secure in a place that's I am. And I don't feel that security there at all. If I'm not part of a movement that's bigger than me, an idea that's bigger than me, or relationships with people that make my world bigger, then it's the most frightening place for me. And I'm not sure of much of anything, except that God is good. I'm not expected to be perfect or good all the time. And there is goodness in everybody. It just doesn't always show itself first. Or maybe,
Show us first, what do you mean?
well, maybe it does show itself first and I can't see it first.
Isn't it like that Bible says something we're supposed to be one?
Well, it's really hard. It's really hard. But I think we are one, we just don't know it. For a while in Life in the Trinity Ministries, we had a publication, and I usually wait for some kind of inspiration to name things, and I've named some things very badly, which means I missed the inspiration evidently. But we did a whole day thing on how to name this publication, and we ended up naming it Holon, Holon. And that word means this, that scientists have not found anything in the universe that isn't whole and complete unto itself and at the same time part of a bigger whole. And that is certainly true for us as humans. So I don't feel like I ever do anything, ever, that doesn't affect other people, ever. And that means I'm not just here on my own and I don't just get to do whatever I want to do.
Well, who's the winner then, Suzanne?
Well, the community is the winner when I can be part of a whole.
Communism?
I think there are parts of every philosophy that have value. That's probably going to get me in trouble, but I do think that's true. And so what the Enneagram teaches me is about how people see. So, you know, there's all this chatter about what number are you, and everybody thinks there's a shortcut to learning the Enneagram, and all of that is bad information. And the reality is your Enneagram personality identification is determined by why you do what you do, not by what you do, and it's determined by how you see. So, for example, my husband is a type that sees two sides to everything, absolutely everything, and I don't. So when I'm sure I'm right about something and he suggests that there's another side, then I understand more about how he sees, and that makes my way of seeing better. But when he sees that sometimes there's a better way that is the best of the options, then he's able to see how I see. Some people are very relational, some people are not. Some people have a lot of energy, some people don't. Some people are capable of neutrality, some people are not.
Capable of what?
Neutrality.
What is that?
Not having something be right or wrong, but just holding a neutral space. And I'm kind of good at choosing between things. I'm not real good at choosing between all good options. But I don't know that I'm very good at neutral. I don't ever feel like I'm in neutral. Like I see the world and think, well, I like that. I don't know if I agree with that. And I'm struggling as I get older to start with space for everybody. Instead of, well, I like you and I didn't connect with you, and I like you and I don't quite agree with you. I have a story that I tell frequently about the fact that I'm mindful of a pastor of a big steeple church who says things that I generally don't agree with at all. And so I decided my spiritual practice would be that I would listen to him every Sunday morning. And until I can ask him to have lunch with me and not need him to believe what I believe, then I'm the things I don't like about him.
That seems like a waste of time, Suzanne. Unless it's good food, I guess.
It's not good food necessarily. I don't think it would be a waste of time, but I'm not there yet. And I don't know if I'll get there, but I'm trying by taking in things I don't agree with instead of just supporting what I already think with people who I know write and think like I do. Seems pretty limiting, actually. And we're so divided. We're so divided from one another, and we're also sure we're right. And I kind of live by the idea that if you're absolutely sure that you're right, you're probably wrong. It seems like if you have real wisdom, you would always wonder if you're right.
What are we missing out on by being right?
Besides community, you can't build a community if everybody has to think the same thing. So I think what we're missing out on is the appreciation that we have the opportunity to have for the diversity of everything. The guy who does my nails for me every 2 weeks is Vietnamese.
Are they good right now?
They are real good, look.
Okay.
Good, huh?
All right.
Well, what's best about them is the relationship between me and the Vietnamese man who makes them look like this for me every 2 weeks. And what I've learned from him is we have so much, it's our responsibility to be grateful and happy. And what I've learned from him is respect for my elders, because that's a cultural way of seeing the world for his culture. And what I've learned from him is that when I'm running late, he says it's all good. And when somebody else is late, he tells them it's all good. And when I say, oh my gosh, I have to leave town, I got to sign books, my hands are going to look terrible, can you work me in? He says, sure I can. Hands are important. And you know, hands aren't important, but they're important to me, right? It's like, if you can't hear and make space for what's important to other people, then how are we going to be in ministry with one another and to one another? So he teaches me all the time. And I just listen. And that's such a nice break from being on a stage telling people what I think. You know, what about what everybody else thinks? So we're back to why I feel lonely, I think. Because so much of the time I'm offering what I believe is mine to talk about and offer, because I believe it'll make the world a better place. But the distance between getting to be with the same people every week and being with different people to every city, in every city that I go to, is sometimes very not just lonely, but isolating, maybe. So maybe the reason I want to talk about community and relationships when I teach is because that's what I miss when I'm teaching. And I'm relational by nature, so that's kind of an extra gift that comes with my personality. And I find that people respond to kindness and they respond to me. So maybe I'm teaching other people to be relational with people you're never going to see again. I don't know. I just know that to be part of a larger community, I have to draw on what I've learned from being part of a smaller community. In our family, there are 19 of us now. 19. And we range in age from 7 months to 71. And in our community, we use a line from an old Bob Dylan song, and it is, how are we going to keep each other forgiven and free? And we work stuff out, and we don't let things fester, and we make everybody get along. It's like a family rule. Figure it out and get back to the table. And I don't ever want to presume to speak for God or God's angels or God's representatives, but it feels in my heart like God wants to look at us and say, figure it out and get back to the table. And somehow we've missed that part of the journey. So we're not figuring things out. We are divided and entitled and sure we're right. People are so sure that they're right, and my question is, what if you're wrong?
What's the first step back to the table?
Not believing you're right about everything, being open-minded, and having space for the way other people see.
I feel like this sort of discussion would be better if we were sitting around a little table than this, but because people online, I don't think we'll be able to, somebody's back of their head, so I'll just stay here and we'll have this discussion. And let that sink in a little bit, I don't know what stands out to you. Does anyone have anything they want to mention?
I thought it was I just loved a lot of the things she said, but kind of what was at the crux of it is she's doing all these things and yet she feels so lonely.
Yeah.
So I thought she's doing everything that we would aspire to do, but despite all of that, the loneliness in her really came out.
Yeah. And she did that in the concept of describing her work, where she travels all over the country, so she's constantly on the road talking to new people, new groups. She mentioned, just in passing, as part of that she has small groups in her at home, but she's not there that much, so it's a little different. Some of us in this group do Thursday Voices, as it was the Thursday discussion group, and so that's a small group that we really value because we know each other so well, and it's a very different context than a Sunday seminar, which is usually bigger, or larger discussions in other contexts. There's something about that small group, but I think she's reflecting. She'd be so skilled in that small group, but she's reflecting her job is to pull her away, and maybe that says something about our society. I think that so many of our jobs pull us away. So many people have to travel for their job. And did anyone else want to make a comment? Chris,
Deb's
yes, Deb.
We were in a group yesterday, some of us, discussion group on the hidden roots of white supremacy. And I think what the discussion we had yesterday about differences was a great example of what she was talking about.
Yeah.
That it just, it was amazing, and I left there saying, wow, this was community, even though we had different views.
Yeah, and you're anticipating something I wanted to get to, and so maybe I'll skip. So the first questions I was going to ask were about her formulation about polarization and where it comes from, and so I want to get back to that because it's an important point, main point I'd like to make actually. But the notion of polarization and relationship, and how has polarization impacted our ability to have relationships with family, with relatives, with friends, that the polarization has definitely had an impact. Now her little formulation starts with, we're in a relationship crisis, and it's due to polarization. Now, do you think our relationship crisis is that polarization explains it all? Or are there other factors in why our relationships aren't what we thought we had when we grew up?
Jenny's got her hand up.
Yeah, Jenny.
I think that it's part polarization and it's part just how we all now feel free to say whatever the heck we want, which has changed in maybe say the last 10 years. Like, and then you add social media to it and there's no barrier. Like the things people say online, they would never say to the person right in front of them. Um, and so I think polarization feels bigger because of that. Like it's not just the polarization, it's amplified. And some of you know that in my own family, I have 4 kids, 4 adult children. Um, one of them is Southern Baptist and one of them is gay. And that presents some very interesting polarization opportunities. And I'm a very, this all came about maybe 8 to 10 years ago, and I was a very publicly lefty, did a lot of political posts, did all those things because that's who I am and that's what I believed in. And now I have to do something different to keep my family together. So when she said how they're a big family of 19 and they have these differences and they say fix it, that's pretty close to how Paul and I have decided to do it. Although part of our thing has also been don't start a conversation that you will not be happy with the results of. So, for instance, Lily, my Southern Baptist daughter, and Tim, my gay son, I have counseled them both. You are welcome to talk to each other about your differences, but just know it might be unsatisfying and it might make getting along harder. So, we've kind of taken a little bit of a stance on that. We don't ignore things, but we don't focus on them. So when she said that, that was deeply meaningful to me because one of my other son's daughters the other day said, I really appreciate how you don't see either of them as wrong. You just let them be your kids.
Thank you, Jenny. That's, anyone else want to comment on that? I was, my reaction to that polarization is obviously polarization has contributed to relationship issues. We all have experiences of that, but there are other factors that people think that they have a relationship because they share emails or go online. If they don't talk to each other, we don't send letters to each other or communicate that way so much. There's a lot more. That's not person to person. So, but anyway, that gets me to the part. And this is what Deb was bringing up. How do you have these difficult conversations? Are you like myself and most of us just work very hard to avoid having difficult conversations, that you just don't bring it up, that, you know, you can come to Thanksgiving, but we can't talk politics or religion, you know, that sort of thing. Is that how you deal with it? Or do you have other examples of how you deal with difficult conversations? Jenny, you bring up the one that Suzanne Stabile talks about. And what she asks her family to do is not just don't talk about it. Said, you work it out. She said, you know, that she's not saying don't talk about it. But I wanted to get into this discussion about difficult conversations by asking you to think about ones you had. And I don't know if there's someone brave enough to give a real example of a difficult conversation they've had and how it worked out. Did it go off the rails as Jenny were anticipating happens so often? Or did it stay on the road? If it did, what did you do or the other person do that kept it okay? And that there was allowed you to have that conversation. And if you, while you're thinking about that, let me just mention what Deb was talking about Thursday Voices. There's some assumptions about Thursday Voices. We call it voices because we don't want to hear Thursday voice. We don't want to do what I'm doing right now, which is to talk to everybody. It's everybody has their turn. You hope that everybody feels comfortable enough to speak what they have to say their piece. We used to make people go one at a time around the table so that everybody got a chance to talk before anyone talked twice, you know. And there's just an acceptance of this is, you're going to be accepting, open to that, to whatever that voice is. And I think that sort of scenario is really rare. I think there's a hunger for that sort of a place where can you have these conversations where you start out with those assumptions of openness and compassion for the person who's talking and turning off your own judgment and listening, that we don't have many places for that. And, but maybe you all do. Better.
Has her
Yeah.
hand raised.
Okay, yes.
Hi,
Beth.
hi, everybody. Recent difficult conversation with my adult children, with my ex-husband about our divorce. Long-term marriage, 34 years, ending, and we were good about seeking outside help and coming to an agreement on how that would be shared with them in a mindful way and not blaming he said, she said kind of thing, because it doesn't serve any purpose. And that was a difficult conversation, but it did go well. We did it in person, individually with them, not together. You know, I don't say that I've read Susan Stabile's, listened to her work, and I met through her, started listening to her and the Enneagram through We Can Do Hard Things. She was on there, and you know, Suzanne's whole family, the life in the ministry is, you know, in Enneagram, and I think that helps them see others seeing the world. And so when we told our kids, for me personally, I looked at them at their ages, they're 24 to 30, and what they might interpret good, bad, and different, and how to put myself in their shoes and then be mindful of that after. I mean, so we did Christmas morning at my daughter's, and we were all there. So we're learning how to co-parent adult children divorced. I've changed religions, you know that. I joined Third Presbyterian. I was a Roman Catholic for birth to 58 and a half, right? So there's a lot of difference there. I don't want to monopolize the time, but yeah, I'm happy to talk about any of that and that difficult conversation. And I just love Suzanne. So again, my higher power, God showing up for me, and you guys all showing up for me. This is just amazing. So thank you.
Thank you, Beth. And you have some similarities to Suzanne's own life, don't you? Her biography of what she was Roman Catholic to well into her adult years. And yeah, but what I was interested in, Suzanne, is, so how did you do any kind of preparation? Like, it sounds like you have yourself personally have done a lot of work that allows you to be in these sorts of open environments where you listen. And how did you prepare your kids for that sort of conversation?
So mine is just walking the walk and living my, you know, my life in such a way where I talk about prayer and meditation and, you know, where I am in my, you know, spiritual journey with them, and being open and honest with that. And that okayness, and admitting that I was very judgmental throughout my adulthood. And unfortunately, my religion kind of propagated that. And I realized I was wrong. And that Suzanne saying that you're right all the time, you saw me heart that, like, for sure. That is one thing that I know very little about, not a lot. And I'm okay with that. And I think if we can all kind of do that curiosity, and that's what I tried to do with this difficult situation of divorce, that not making it right or wrong, but just making our lives better, and making that the point of that our lives will be better, and we don't have to do it together as a married couple, and acceptance of that. And I think because I honestly, truly believe that, my kids can feel that. They feel that I'm better off, we're better off not together. And yeah, so that, if I answered the question, I don't know.
Well, I hope you don't mind me pursuing it, and maybe other people have questions for you too. But and your husband, how did he come into do you mind me asking about that? How did he come into accept this sort of attitude about your differences?
It was difficult because I initiated it, and he was very surprised about it. So we were a year, almost, well, 6 or 7 months in therapy, a year of difficult conversations before this all took place. And, you know, therapy helped us, the discussions helped us a lot. And he, you know, kind of came kicking and screaming a little bit, but he did show up for our kids. He definitely, like, he shows up for his kids. So that is our common thread. And if that's what's keeping us in this difficult transition, divorced, how do we maneuver this parenting thing? It's worked out. And that has been, you know, that has been a great part of our relationship. Our kids are just the best part of our marriage. And I think if we can, so finding commonality, right? That was the one common thing that we both sought to be successful in, regardless of our other you know, the other things that weren't good, like the reasons why we're getting divorced. And I think that's what got us to where we are right now. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. We have a lot of work to do, but I think the common thread of the kids has really helped us grow. So, yeah, he did come kicking and screaming, but
Thank you, Beth. That was a wonderful example of difficult conversations. Anyone else want to talk about a difficult conversation? It doesn't have, I mean, what was on my mind when I picked this topic was the political feeling in the country. And yet the Stabile video refocused me that's an example of something that we see a lot of in all sorts of realms. But maybe other people want to talk about it different. Yeah, Deb, you want to talk about it?
Yeah, how do you get people to come to the table?
Right.
There's been a disagreement and that
Yeah.
person will ignore text messages, will ignore
Mhm.
any kind of message, will not come.
I
I,
think Stabile mentions, she uses the word generosity to talk about, you enter into these conversations with generosity, where you're there to listen, and so there's a mindset that allows it to happen. Beth mentioned another word that I like, that issues, the generosity issues, but also the curiosity, which you enter into those conversations with a real and genuine interest in understanding that other person. And so I think those two things help, but the person who doesn't want to get into the conflictual conversation or potential conflictual one might not come anyway, even if you set up that table that way. Set the table. That's another Stabile thing. She's talking about setting the table, you know, and bringing them to the table. Yeah, Karen.
I thought of this when you were talking about voices, which at one point in my life was a really important group for me, and I'm not a part of it any longer, but I think that one word that hasn't been brought up that facilitates difficult conversations is trust. You have to trust that the other person can hear you and respect your opinion, and you have to trust yourself not to overstep your boundaries. And I think that that's something that most of us find hard to do. You know, I'm somebody who really liked to think I was right. I learned a long time ago that I'm not, frequently not right, but that was really my personality for a very long time. Enneagram helped me a lot in understanding how different I am from my daughter. You know, we don't have to have difficult conversations because we're pretty much on the same page about a lot of things. But the way that she thinks about things and the things that are important to her are not the things that are important to me. And it's taken me, I don't know, just since I took Beth's course, I have a better understanding of her and can appreciate in new ways. I always appreciated her creativity and her intelligence, but I appreciated her in a new way, and I can let go of some of the things that drive me nuts when I'm staying with her. You know, because we have a very different lifestyle in terms of what's important to us. But, you know, trust has always been, I think, something. I mean, I said some things in Voices, and Betty Iwan once said to me, "Oh my goodness, Karen, I can't believe that." You know, but I only was willing to share those things because I trusted everybody in that room not to go out of that room and talk about it. You know, that I could be really open with it. And that was the value for me in that group, was the trust that we had in one another. So just throw that adjective out there too.
Yeah.
Jenny's on screen.
Yes, Jim.
I was, you know, when you were talking about the difficult conversation, I remember the conversation when we talked to Lily about her brother being gay, and it was indeed a very difficult conversation. And there were parts of Paul and I, how we quote unquote, how we raised her, we didn't agree with her newly found personal beliefs about what being gay means. And she stated what she stated, and then I basically said, well, I'm going to agree to disagree. I just don't find it a sin. I find that's just not. And she's like, well, but the Bible says it is. And I said, yep, and I still disagree. And that's kind of how we've left it. And I expect that she and Tim will have a conversation at some point, but she is just 27 and he is just 21. So this is now go back 5 years ago. So he would have only been 16 and she would have only been 21. I don't think they would have had the emotional maturity to have the conversation without the stings landing. I think as they get older, they will. There was another podcast, Beth, on We Can Do Hard Things that I listened to yesterday with a woman called Nell Robbins. And she's just written a new book called Let Them. And it's, in other words, it's, I need to let Lily have her opinions. I need to let Tim be Tim. And then when we do that, it allows us to have a little space, and I can now say, well, what's my reaction to this going to be? I can just sit back and watch it unfold, and I can give them space. Something one of you said reminded me of the idea that when we're not invested in changing their opinion, we can let it be. And then that allows them to have space. And I think that's what Paul and I have done, is we've really tried to step back and give the kids space to have their own relationships. Like, I wish they were all 4 peas in a pod and wanted to do everything together. And that's sometimes true and sometimes not true, but that's got to be them. And we've got to give them that space not to kind of be in conflict all the time. And somehow it works. It really does. And when I say we have the political, if you get politics involved, even among the 4 of them, there's 4 different opinions on everything. And it's not that we don't talk about it, but we don't make that our primary focus.
Thanks, Julia. So you and Beth obviously have been you know more about Stabile and by far you've gotten into that a lot more. So I should turn the talk over to you guys. You can tell us more about what Stabile, because I'm not here as a lecturer. This was a video series that gives us good reasons for thought, and so I appreciate that. One thing about the Enneagram, I noticed. Now she's been called, the godmother of Enneagram. She didn't talk about it that much. But of course, this was just a brief 15-minute. But the other 2 videos that are part of the series, she doesn't get into it much either. And yet it's reflected in her thought a lot, so much you can see. But one thing I really liked about the Enneagram, and you might want to, those of you who have gotten into it, that I really liked, it helped me understand people that I just don't get. There are people who say, what, you're coming from a different place. Yeah, they are. And so I have this maybe is too personal, but I've got a son-in-law who's a math professor, and he lives in the math world, which is not my world. And it's and he loves being in that world, in his own. And Beth, I brought this up at an Enneagram class with Beth Strever, and so she explained it. It's just exactly what Suzanne Stabile said. He processes things in a totally different way. He thinks about things so that his view of what's going on comes from a totally different process. And that I appreciated him so much more after doing Enneagram. And so I think anyone who hasn't done the Enneagram, you might be a way to help you understand those people in your life who you can't, you sort of like, what's wrong with them, when it isn't that. But do either of you want to talk about that, the Enneagram, and how that comes out and what Stabile was telling us today?
I think it's that piece. It actually ties in really nice with the let them piece, is that she says it's not, it outwardly appears like it's your behaviors that determine your number in the Enneagram, but it's not. It's about why you do the things you do, not the things you do. And so she talks about like why different people might go for leadership roles, and each person's motivation might be different. You know, one person's motivation might be, well, because only I can do it right, and another person's motivation might be, I just want the challenge. So she does talk, the motivation piece is really big, which she's very interesting, and it makes me want to recommit to trying to figure out a time to get into one of Beth's classes, because I'd really like to get back to it.
You would enjoy, and I bet you she'll be different than Stabile, if you've done much with the Enneagram. I bet
Yeah,
you-
I've done work with Beth before. Yeah.
Yeah, each practitioner has different focuses, but one of Beth's favorites is let it go. You gotta learn to let it go. There's certain things about yourself, about your own personality, but I think that also comes to these sort of the parenting sort of family relationships we've been talking about here. Well, let me ask you this. So you're the person you're talking to is absolutely certain they're right. And that, so how do you get into that conversation when they have an immovable position already? And so I should say, my wife is here today, Pam, but she's an expert in this sort of thing. Because I'm someone who thinks I know what's right and right. But Pam's instinct is to listen. It's that old adage of God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we should listen twice as much as we talk, sort of. But she listens and takes it in, and she convinces me that she's agreeing with me just because she listens so well. And I feel heard. And then once I feel heard, then I can let go a little bit and actually hear a slightly different voice. But maybe it's the trust you're talking about, Karen. But if someone is a good listener first, that may actually disarm the person who thinks they've got it exactly right and you have to totally agree with me or not, or we're not gonna be able to talk. But I think that's an important part.
One of the things that struck me is the need to find what she called a third way.
Yeah.
That is not this armed camp, and there's just the DMZ between us where it's scorched earth and no one can survive. But it sounds to me like Thursday Voices has sort of been declared by the participants that this is a third way. This is a place where we can talk and think and speak, and there isn't going to be fallout, that it all flies off the rails at that. And sometimes families, you've got that blood connection, for better or worse, but you have a reason to keep on going together rather than saying, okay, you're out of here, I'm out of here. But in most of our lives, we don't have very many places. We sort by various different qualities or perspectives, and we wind up going with like rather than in a mixed group that can actually hear and speak and stretch each other. A number of years ago, there was a magazine called Putney Reader that didn't produce original research or writing, but it pulled different works on all sorts of themed topics together in one place. And what I loved about it was there were things in each issue of that made me want to throw it across the room. But that was healthy for me to read those things and to get those other perspectives rather than just to be in an echo chamber of here's what I think, here's other people who think exactly like I think.
Yeah.
I think for me, one of the things that she said that struck me was figure it out. So when you hear something you don't agree with, instead of jumping in to say what you think, figure out why that person might think that, or ask, and that's one. But the other one I like, I guess I really hadn't thought about it so much, is let it go. And the person who needs to let it go is me.
Mhm.
not the other person. I need to learn how to let it go. Don't make a big deal out of it. I'm notorious for catastrophizing, you know, and I'm really good at it. And that's something else I've learned you gotta let some of that go.
That's an example of the motivation versus the behavior thing. And that's the value of Enneagram is understanding your own motivations.
Oh, yeah.
Why is that sticking in your craw so much when it's not that big a deal? Why is it bothering you so much? And that requires some self-examination to understand where that's coming from.
Well, and I live with somebody who I adore, but he doesn't think like I do at all, you know, and so when I'm catastrophizing, he looks at me like, Karen, what's going on here? You know, and so, that helps me really, but Enneagram really helped me define some of the things that I said to somebody the other day, we were talking about it, and I said, I was so glad I didn't take it till I was in my 70s. Because by the time I was in my 70s, I had given up some of the worst parts of that personality because I'd been in therapy. I live with a man who's very, kind of therapeutic. So I'd given up some of those really negative pieces of who I could have been, over time. So, because I could see myself, when we're talking about that personality that I am, and I'm a pretty clear person at that. I mean, it's easy to find me really easily. But I'd given up some of the really negative things that I used to do. So I was glad I didn't take it in my 30s because I might have run the other way. I don't know.
Right, and those of us who come from a personality that wanted to be right all the time. When you're entering a situation where someone's telling you not is really challenging, and then particularly when it goes to the core of who you are, not just an opinion about some specific thing. And so that's why I love that word curiosity. If you think about what is your mindset going into this conversation, if it's about trying to understand where the other person's coming from, it's very different than if the whole time they're talking, you're thinking about what your rebuttals want to be, and so it's that curiosity, and you learn something, and that's what I think everybody in 30 Voices feels this way. You learn something when you go, because you're open, you want to hear what other people have to say, and it's much more interesting when it's not just what you would have said anyway,
Right.
Yes, Betty.
So we have one of our 4 grandsons is politically way on the other end of the spectrum, and I just and he's young, he's 18, still pretty young. But I just can't deal with it very well, and I don't see him very much. He's far away, but conversations on the phone and such. It's hard for me to see, and he watches lots of videos, and I'm afraid he's gotten a lot of conspiracy theories in his mind. And I just want to shake him and say, wake up, get off the tube to TV, think about what you're supporting in this person that's, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And so that's very different than, say, living with a husband who is very different. I have a husband who stays up till 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm in bed at 10. I've learned, over 62 years to understand that. But when somebody is really supporting somebody who's diametrically opposed to what I believe is good things, a good person, et cetera, et cetera.
My first reaction in those situations is to say, what did you, so if it wasn't a failure, say, okay, well, I won't never get together with them again if I can avoid it. That's my first instinct. So it's a lot easier.
And that would be easier if it was a friend, but this is a relative.
But it is a relative, but you're gonna have a relationship ongoing.
Yeah.
So that's where the switch comes from, trying to convince them that they're wrong to trying to understand why they think that way. That if that's how you enter those conversations, then he may be less defending a hard position as adamantly if he thinks you're listening to him, as opposed to trying to teach him something. That's, I'm being overly simplistic, and I'm sorry, but I think that approach requires practice. And if you start doing that regularly, which I hope I can do, but you start doing it regularly, it becomes more of a default. And then people find you easy to talk to, and they actually want to explain where they're coming from, rather than being adamant about a particular position more. But maybe that's naive, but I understand. Well, we're getting close to the time of closing. I don't know if anyone wanted to bring up anything else. I mean, maybe I had one example I wanted to bring up, and I didn't want it to dominate the conversation. But difficult conversation I recently had was, I have a sister who recently lost her husband, and they had become very isolated themselves. And so now she's living by herself in a house. She's got early dementia. And so I've got 5 sisters and myself. And so we all have different ideas of what should be done. I've got one sister who wants to tell her what to do. You can't live in a house alone anymore. She's fallen multiple times. The local fire department sent out a social worker to try to convince her to go to assisted living because they had to go out 11 times in a few months to pick her up, because she couldn't get up after falling. So that it seems so obvious that, my God, she should be in a place where she can be taken care of more. She is no way she's going to do that. And she generally won't even be able to come into the home practically. But so I went out there and just to see how she's doing, really, but guy to being a spy, I wanted to see what she was capable of, and whether how hard we should push to get her into a facility where she could have some care. And I talked to her son. Now, her son knows her a lot better than I do. And his take was, well, is this the worst place she could be? She would think that the worst place she could be would be in a nursing home school. Absolutely. And so she would rather, I hate to say it, but she would rather fall over and die in that house than go somewhere else. And who are we to say, out of our own discomfort, that we think she should go somewhere? So she's had a lot of difficult conversations with a social worker, with some of my sisters, about what she should do. And it's always someone's coming in and telling her what to do. And she's in a sort of tumultuous time now, having just lost her husband, who did almost everything, financial and stuff. And so she's confused. She knows she's confused, but boy, she sure is not confused about one thing. She's not leaving that house. So that's a difficult conversation. So I took my cue from her son, who basically said you have to listen to her. Now, I don't know, have you all had conversations like this? And how did it go? Sort of conversations like taking the keys away from grandpa.
I've had one of those, taking the keys away from my father after several fender benders. He had Parkinson's disease, and he was losing his sense of space. He couldn't move his body around an apartment, let alone a car down a road, and know where fenders are and street signs and things like that. And I am not a confrontational kind of guy, but I knew for his safety and the safety of everybody around him, I had to just take the keys. And it went okay, simply because I figured he's not capable of doing a flying tackle across the room and taking them back. And in Rochester, I'm gonna take the keys away, and if they're with me in Rochester, you can't do anything about it. And he was chagrined, but he basically accepted it. It was not a knockdown, drag out kind of thing. And maybe it had reached the point of inevitability that even he recognized the reality of it. But boy, that was a conversation I was dreading going into.
What preceded that conversation was your relationship with her.
Right.
And so is there anyone else in your family who could have accomplished that task?
It was good. I my sister lived closer to them and she saw my parents more frequently, so. I was glad to be the bad guy from afar, that I can have this thing and go away again. And she didn't have to be a point of friction day in and day out the way I could and just. I'm laying down the law and now I'm going away and gotta deal with it.
Yeah, a good point, Chris, and there are times when softening up the situation by going and visiting and getting their point of view and then getting to that takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can't do it. Well, thank you all for
Yeah.
being part of this conversation, and we'll have two more of these the next 2 weeks. And thank you so much for those, for Jenny and Beth. Beth isn't here anymore, but for knowing Susan Stabile better and bringing that perspective, we really appreciate it. Okay,
Thank you.
all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brian.